She said it the way you'd say the dishwasher needs to be emptied. Casual, matter of fact. Like it wasn't my home too. I need you to stay in the guest room this Sunday, just for the afternoon. I set down my coffee cup. Slowly, the whole family is coming, my wife continued, already turning back to her phone. My mother is finally meeting everyone together for the first time since her surgery. I don't want any tension at the table. I asked her what tension she was referring to. She looked up at me then, not with anger, worse with patience. The kind of patience you show someone who is being dense on purpose. You know how you get, Gerald. You make everything uncomfortable. Just let this one be about her, okay? I am 63 years old. I have lived in that house for 21 years. I helped pay off the roof. I planted the oak tree in the backyard that now gives shade to the whole left side of the yard. And my wife of 26 years was asking me to eat alone in the guest room while her family gathered at the dining table I built with my own hands, the summer our youngest started high school. I didn't argue. I've learned over the years that some fights aren't worth starting because they won't end where you think they will. I just nodded. Fine, I said. Whatever you need. She smiled and went back to her phone. That night I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when I had become a guest in my own life. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. My mother-in-law had never liked me. That part I'd accepted 20 years ago. She thought her daughter had married beneath her. I was a retired county road supervisor, not a doctor or an attorney or anyone who wore a tie to work. My wife came from a family that cared deeply about appearances. Her mother had a way of sitting at a dinner table that made you feel like you were being graded on your posture. Her brother, my brother-in-law, was worse in a quieter way. He smiled at everything I said and agreed with nothing. He had borrowed money from us 3 times in the last decade and paid it back twice. The third loan, $11,000, we never discussed again, and I had learned not to bring it up because it made my wife go silent in a way that lasted for days. Her sister was the one I had once considered an ally. But alliances shift. Hers had shifted somewhere around the time her mother's health started declining and everyone began circling closer to home. I was the one person at that table who had no inheritance to gain. Maybe that's why I was being asked to leave it. Sunday came the way. Sundays do quiet and then suddenly loud. Cars in the driveway by noon. My wife dressed nicely, wearing the blue blouse she saved for occasions that mattered to her. The smell of her mother's recipes coming from the kitchen, things my wife had been preparing since the night before. I had spent the morning outside, walked the perimeter of the yard, checked the garden, sat on the back porch with a second cup of coffee I didn't really want. Just putting distance between myself and the situation before it officially began. Around 11:30, my wife found me outside. They'll be arriving soon, she said. I looked at her over my coffee. I know, I said. So, you understand what we talked about? I understood. I went inside, walked past the dining room where she had set the good dishes, and went down the hall to the guest room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed that our grandchildren sometimes slept in when they visited, and I listened to my family arrive in the house without me. I heard my mother-in-law's voice first, bright and carrying, the way it always was when she wanted people to know she had entered a room. I heard my brother-in-law's laugh, my sister-in-law's children running on the hardwood floor, the particular sound of a family gathering that I had been a part of for more than half my adult life. And I sat alone in the guest room and waited for it to be over. Around the time I guessed they were finishing the main course, I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but I had a careful habit I developed over the last year or so of checking certain things when I had quiet time. My wife and I kept our finances somewhat separate, the way some couples do after a certain number of years. I had my accounts, she had hers, and we had a joint account for household expenses. I handled the joint account. I handled most of the practical things. But about a year earlier, I had noticed something. A small thing at first. A charge on the joint account I didn't recognize. A transfer that moved money out and then moved it back 2 weeks later in a slightly different amount. Numbers that should have added up to something they didn't quite add up to. I hadn't said anything. I am a man who watches before he speaks. I'd learned that from my father, who had survived more than one hard season by knowing when to act and when to simply pay attention. So I'd been paying attention. What I found that Sunday afternoon, sitting on the guest room bed with the sound of my family's laughter coming through the wall, was not what I expected to find. It was worse. Over the previous 11 months, someone had made 17 withdrawals from a savings account attached to my name, an account I had opened years ago for a specific purpose and rarely touched. The withdrawals were small enough to avoid automatic alerts. spread across enough time to look like normal activity if you weren't looking closely. I was looking closely now. The account had held a little over $40,000. It held $11,400 now. I sat very still. I am not a man who panics. I spent 30 years managing road crews and county contracts and emergencies that required clear heads and quick decisions. I know what it feels like when the ground shifts under you and you have to decide in that moment whether you're going to fall or find your footing. I found my footing. I opened a new window on my laptop and pulled up the account's full activity log. I went through every transaction. I took notes on a yellow legal pad I found in the desk drawer. Dates, amounts, account numbers for where the transfers had gone. 2 of the destination accounts were ones I recognized. They were accounts in my brother-in-law's name. I sat with that for a long moment. The laughter through the wall continued. My mother-in-law said something, and everyone responded warmly. Chairs scraped. Someone was getting seconds. I wrote down 2 more numbers on the legal pad and closed the laptop. I didn't go to the dining room. I didn't open the guest room door. I sat on the bed with my notes, and I thought about 26 years and what they meant and what I was going to do with what I had just found. When the family finally left, I tracked it by the sound of cars backing out of the driveway. My wife knocked on the guest room door. They're gone, she said. You can come out. I opened the door. She looked at me with an expression that was meant to be peace offering, or maybe just neutral. She had a glass of sweet tea in her hand, and she held it out slightly, not quite offering it, not quite keeping it. It went really well, she said. My mother had a good time. Good, I said. You're not angry? I looked at her. My wife of 26 years, the mother of our 2 children, the woman I had driven to the hospital 3 times in moments of real fear, whose cold feet I had tolerated in winter for more than 2 decades, whose family I had funded quietly and without complaint for most of our marriage. Not yet, I said. She tilted her head slightly. What does that mean? It means I need to make some calls tomorrow morning, I said, and I think you should know that I will be making them. I walked past her toward the kitchen. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. The calls I made Monday morning were not the kind you make in anger. I had slept on it. I had reread my notes. I had gone back through the documents twice more, with fresh eyes, and confirmed what I already knew. First, I called my bank. I spoke to someone in the fraud department, and I was calm and specific. I read them the transaction numbers. I gave them the dates. I asked them to flag the account and freeze any further activity pending investigation. The woman on the phone asked me if I wanted to file a formal report. I said yes. Then I called my attorney. He is a man I have known for many years, the kind of attorney who does not alarm easily. I told him what I had found. I told him the account numbers I recognized. I told him about the transfers to my brother-in-law's accounts. He was quiet for a moment. Gerald, he said, this is not a small thing. I know, I said. Do you want to talk to your wife before we proceed? I thought about Sunday afternoon. The guest room, the sound of laughter through the wall, the blue blouse she saved for occasions that mattered to her. No, I said, I want to proceed. My attorney told me to document everything and bring it to his office on Wednesday. He said, depending on what the bank's investigation found, we might be looking at more than a civil matter. He used the phrase unauthorized account access twice. He said my brother-in-law's involvement would need to be looked at carefully. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my 3rd cup of coffee, and I thought about how long it takes to understand a situation you've been living inside. My wife called me around 2 in the afternoon. I was in the garage, going through some old files I kept in a fireproof lockbox, making sure I had physical copies of everything that mattered. Her name came up on my phone, and I answered. Gerald. Her voice was different. Not the voice from Sunday, the patient voice, the one that had asked me to eat in the guest room. This was a voice I had heard before, only a handful of times in 26 years. Tight, high-pitched in a way she couldn't fully control. Afraid. Gerald, my mother just got a call. I waited. Something about a fraud investigation. They said the bank said there was a flag on an account. Gerald, what did you do? I let the question sit there for a moment. I reported unauthorized withdrawals from my savings account, I said. $28,600 over 11 months. The line was silent. Gerald, I have the transaction records, I said. I have the destination account numbers. My attorney has copies of everything as of this morning. Gerald, please, I can explain. I know you can, I said. I imagine your mother can too. And your brother. I'd suggest all 3 of you find good attorneys before the week is out. Gerald, please don't do this. After everything this family, we've been through so much. I have been patient for 26 years, I said. I sat in the guest room on Sunday while you all sat at the table I built. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cause tension. I am still not causing tension. I am simply responding to the facts. If you would just... I need to go, I said. I'll be staying at my brother's house this week. My attorney will be in touch with you about next steps. If you need to reach me for something urgent, you can call. Otherwise, I'd prefer we let the attorneys handle it. I hung up. I stood in the garage for a moment with the phone in my hand. The lockbox was open on the workbench beside me. 26 years of documents, organized and labeled in a way that had always felt excessive to other people and now felt like the most sensible thing I had ever done. My wife called back twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. I packed a bag. Not frantically, not with drama, just the methodical packing of a man who knows what he needs for a week away from home. I took my medications, my good walking shoes, the 2 books I was reading, my legal pad with its notes, and a framed photograph from the hallway. It was a picture of me and my children from a fishing trip about 15 years ago. Both of them, squinting in the sun, holding up something one of them had caught. I didn't remember which one had caught it. I took the picture anyway. My brother answered on the second ring. Need a room for a few nights, I said. He didn't ask for details. That's the thing about brothers, the good ones anyway. He just said, come on, I'll put on coffee. The drive to his house took 40 minutes. I drove carefully, the way I always did, the way I'd learned to do in the years when I was responsible for the safety of other people's roads. Checking mirrors, watching the edges, not rushing any of it. It rained a little on the way. That thin, quiet kind of rain that doesn't feel like much, but by the time you get where you're going, your jacket is damp and you hadn't noticed it happening. My brother was standing on his porch when I pulled in. He looked at me the way brothers look at each other when something serious has happened and there is nothing useful to say about it yet. Come on inside, he said. We sat at his kitchen table and I told him what I had found and what I had done. He listened without interrupting, which was a gift. When I was finished, he poured us both something stronger than coffee and we sat with it for a while. How do you feel? He asked eventually. I considered the question honestly. Tired, I said, but clear. He nodded. Clear is good, he said. I slept better that night than I had in longer than I wanted to admit. There is something about having finally acted, about having made the calls you were afraid to make, having said the words you were afraid to say that loosened something in your chest that had been tight for a very long time. My mother-in-law called me the next morning. I didn't answer. My brother-in-law texted twice. I read both texts without responding. The first one said this was all a misunderstanding. The second one said he had the money and could explain everything. I forwarded both to my attorney. My sister-in-law, the one I had once considered an ally, sent a longer message. She said the family was in shock. She said my wife was devastated. She said she hoped I would consider what 26 years meant before doing something we'd all regret. I read it carefully. Then I put the phone face down on my brother's kitchen table and went out to help him in his garden, where we spent most of the morning in comfortable silence, pulling up things that had stopped growing and making room for what might grow in their place. My attorney called Wednesday afternoon with an update. The bank's investigation had confirmed the unauthorized withdrawals. The destination accounts were, as I had noted, in my brother-in-law's name. There was also a new detail, a credit card opened in my name 8 months ago, one I had never authorized, which had accumulated $4,000 in charges. That account had been discovered through my initial fraud report and added to the investigation automatically. This has moved into territory where law enforcement may become involved, my attorney told me. The credit card alone constitutes identity theft. Combined with the savings account activity, we are looking at multiple serious charges. I thanked him and told him to continue. My wife called that evening. I answered this time. She had been crying. I could tell not from the sound of it, but from the careful steadiness she was trying to maintain over it, the way she was speaking with a control that only exists when someone has been crying and stopped and is trying not to start again. Gerald, she said, I need to tell you something. I'm listening, I said. I didn't know about the savings account. I want you to know that. I didn't. I knew he had borrowed money from us before, but I didn't know about the account. I didn't know he had access to it. I listened to her breathe. But, she said, and then stopped. But, I repeated, gently. My mother knew, she said. She knew she let him use her login to access the joint paperwork. She had your information from when she helped us with the estate stuff 3 years ago, when your mother passed and we were doing all that paperwork. She gave it to him. She said she thought you wouldn't miss it. She said she was helping him. The rain from 2 days ago had moved on and left everything clean and slightly cold. I stood at my brother's kitchen window and looked at the yard and thought about my mother-in-law sitting at a table I had built, eating food my wife had cooked, in a house where she had just arranged to have me locked in a guest room so no one would be uncomfortable while her son spent money he had taken from me. "Gerald, I'm sorry," my wife said. I should have seen it. I should have protected you from this. You were always good to this family. You were always so good to all of us, and I let them." She stopped. The steadiness she had been maintaining broke slightly at the edges. I didn't say anything for a moment. "I believe you didn't know about the account," I said finally. "I believe that, Gerald. But I also know you knew something was wrong for a long time," I said. "And I know you let it go because it was easier. And I know you put me in the guest room on Sunday because it was easier. And I know I have spent a very long time being the easiest part of your life, while everyone else was the hardest." She didn't argue with any of it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now the legal process happens," I said. "I'm not going to stop it. What your mother and your brother did is a serious thing, and it needs to be addressed seriously." "And us?" she said. "What about us?" I thought about that for a moment. 26 years. The fishing trip photograph on my brother's guest room dresser, the oak tree in the backyard, the roof, the table. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I'm going to need some time to sit with that." "I understand," she said. "I know you do," I said. "I'll be in touch." I hung up and stood at the window a while longer. My brother came in from the back and looked at me. "You okay?" he asked. I thought about it. "Yes," I said, and meant it. Some things, when you finally face them, are not as heavy as you expected. Not because they don't matter, they matter enormously, but because there is something in the act of facing them, the phone calls made, the notes written down, the decisions followed through, that transfers the weight from a place inside you where it had been sitting unacknowledged for too long to a place outside you where it can finally be handled. I had been quiet for a very long time. Not the quiet of a man who has nothing to say, the quiet of a man who keeps everything close, who absorbs the insults and the exclusions and the slow erosion of respect without comment, who tells himself he is being patient when sometimes he is simply being afraid to disturb the peace. There is a difference between peace and silence. I had been living in silence. My attorney filed the formal documentation on Friday. The bank's fraud report went through official channels. My brother-in-law retained an attorney by Thursday afternoon, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking it. My mother-in-law called me on Friday evening. I answered. She spoke for a while about family and loyalty and how long she had known me and what it meant to be connected by blood and marriage and time. She spoke in the voice she used when she expected to be accommodated. I let her finish. "I love your daughter," I said. "I have loved her for 26 years. I have supported this family, all of you, with time and money and goodwill for most of those years. What you allowed to happen to my account was a crime, not a misunderstanding, not a family matter, a crime, and it will be treated as one." She started to speak again. "I want you to know that this is not anger," I said. "I am not a man who acts out of anger. This is just what happens when you mistake someone's patience for permission." I said goodnight and hung up. My brother was sitting at the kitchen table reading the paper. He looked up. "How'd that go?" he asked. "Fine," I said. He nodded and went back to his paper. I went to the kitchen and made us both sandwiches for dinner, and we ate them at the table and talked about his garden and the weather forecast for the weekend and the book he was reading, and it was a completely ordinary evening, and I was grateful for every minute of it. That is the thing they don't tell you about standing up for yourself after a very long time. It doesn't feel triumphant, exactly. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like being able to breathe again, like a window you had forgotten was closed has finally been opened. And the air coming in is ordinary air, nothing special about it, but it is fresh, and it is real, and it is yours. I spent 3 weeks at my brother's house. During that time, the legal process moved forward the way legal processes do, slowly, with paperwork, with calls from attorneys and questions that needed answering and forms that needed signatures. My brother-in-law eventually repaid the funds as part of a civil agreement to avoid criminal prosecution. My attorney negotiated terms that were fair. My mother-in-law did not apologize directly, but she also did not contest anything. My wife and I had several long conversations during those 3 weeks. Honest ones, the kind we hadn't had in years, maybe the kind we should have been having all along. She told me things about her family she had never said out loud. I told her things about what our marriage had felt like from the inside in ways I had never articulated. I'm not going to tell you where we landed. That part is private, and it is still in progress, the way most real things are. What I will tell you is this. I went home on a Thursday afternoon. The oak tree in the backyard had dropped some leaves in the cold that had come through while I was gone, and they were scattered across the yard in a way that needed attending to. I raked them up. It took the better part of an hour, working slowly, working carefully, the way I did most things. When I was done, I stood on the back porch and looked at the yard and the tree and the house that had been mine for 21 years, and I thought about all the things a man builds quietly over a lifetime, the physical ones and the other kind, and I thought about what he owes himself when those things are not treated with care. He owes himself honesty. He owes himself action. He owes himself the knowledge that patience is a virtue only when it is chosen. When it becomes a habit of swallowing what you deserve to say, it is something else. Something that costs you more than it costs anyone around you. I had paid enough of that cost. I was done paying it quietly.